Okay, so it's Tuesday, week 10. We're going to get started for today. So what are we doing today? By way of introduction, we're going to spend a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, talking about SSL certificates. We talked a little bit about them last week. So we'll do a little walkthrough with SSL certificates, and then our main topic for today is file uploads. So this is one of the not very large minor requirements in your assignment. We need to look at how do we let users upload files to us and process those files in a PHP application. Okay, so we're going to do that today. So we'll basically build a few standalone pages just to see how the upload works, and then we'll integrate file uploading with images into our athletes application that we've been building out basically since week 2. Just to give you an idea of sort of our schedule for over the next few classes, what I think we are going to do, unless anybody has a big objection, because I'm not actually going to be here during the final week, during exam week, I'm going to be on college business. I'm going to be away actually in India. So what I think we're going to do is have our final exam on week 13 instead. Okay, so on week 14 we will not have class, but what I'm going to do instead is make that an open lab, and I'm going to give you some lab amnesty, meaning if you have labs you didn't complete, I will give you a chance to do any outstanding labs, not for full marks, but at least for part marks, and part marks is better than none. Okay. If you've completed and gotten 2.5% on 4 of your labs, you don't need to do the 5th one, really. There's no lab today, so we've done 3. So we're going to have a lab in class next week. We will have a lab in class on week 12 as well, so there'll be labs each of the next 2 weeks. I'm telling you that right now. And then week 13 will be the final exam. Okay, so in week 14 there is no class, but I'll give you that time. I know you have other midterms, other finals to study for, so you will already have this one done, and you can either take that time to study for your other exams, or you can also work on any labs that you've missed to pick up some extra marks. If there's anybody who has a problem with that and who really wants our exam during week 14, I can have a substitute come in here, but I figured it was probably better for me as well as better for you if we did our exam in week 13. Okay, so if anybody has a concern about that, you can feel free to come and talk to me or send me an email. I'm judging by some of the nods and smiles, most of you are okay with that plan. Okay, so
not that we have a choice.
Well, I mean, yeah, you do. If everybody had said we want that extra class in week 13 and we want to do the exam in week 14, and I could have somebody come in and supervise the exam, I can do that. That is a possibility. So, but I'm judging from people's faces and reactions that my plan is okay with most of you. Okay. So again, no lab this week, labs the next 2 weeks, and then your final exam is actually in 3 weeks. Okay.
When you say it like that, now it's scary.
That's the opposite.
Well, what we're going to do in 2 weeks, your lab 5, in a way, is going to be an exam, a review for the exam, doing the lab. Okay. So you'll want to be sure that you're here for that. Okay, so let's talk about SSL certificates. We talked a little bit about them last week when we were talking about requirements for building an e-commerce site. So, for example, if we look at this page, we can tell that this page is using an SSL certificate. How can we tell? There are a couple visual cues in the browser that indicate it's using an SSL certificate. So we see a lock here in the address bar. And we see HTTPS. S stands for secure. Okay. What does that HTTPS and that lock, what does it actually do?
It encrypts the whole boat traffic.
Okay, that's right. So by default, all of the text that's sent over HTTP, so when we fill out a form and submit that data to the server, or we just click on a link and load a page, all of the text that comes from the server, it just gets sent as plain text from the web server to us. Which means that anybody who intercepts that traffic anywhere along the way between our internet service provider and the server, they've got access to look at all that data. So for loading a static web page, loading the kinds of things we've been doing in class, that doesn't really matter if I load, our login page from last week. you know, just to load this page, it's not that critical, but if I put in my login and submit it, the traffic goes from my IP here all the way out to the DreamHost server, so if anybody on the way grabs that, they're going to be able to see what I've entered. Okay? So the idea of an SSL certificate is it encrypts that text so that it, rather than plain text, if somebody intercepts it, they're going to have to decrypt it. Okay? So basically, pretty much any site, unless it's just a public site, if there's a control panel where somebody's going to log in, we probably should have an SSL certificate running on it. Okay, so it's not difficult to set up an SSL certificate, but there are a few steps involved in the process, and I'm going to show you how this works. Because if you're working on a web application where you figure it should be secured with an SSL certificate, it's going to be usually your responsibility as the developer to enable that process. Okay, so how does this process work? You know, we built this app with site, we realize we have a login, so we know that we're going to need an SSL certificate. So where do you get one, first of all? Where could you go? What kinds of places would sell you an SSL certificate?
There's this company called DigiCert.
Called?
DigiCert.
DigiCert, okay, we could look there and see what they charge. Anybody have an idea what an SSL certificate costs? Well, let's see what DigiCert is charging. Now, there's different levels of SSL certificates. So they have different, so these have 2048-bit encryption. They are $140. These would be US dollars a year. Okay. Now, you can get cheaper ones, so that's an option. Probably the cheapest certificates I have ever seen are here. So if you want a super cheap one, if we go in, let's look at the SSL certificates. We can see the different pricing, and you can see some of the different options that come with them. So let's go to the compare products.
But is it secure enough
Okay, so you can get them for as low as $11 a year Canadian, okay? Now notice, you only get a 15-day refund. It's for one domain, and you have a very small warranty. You know, for 120, you get multiple subdomains. So maybe you have www.domain.com. You also have, you know, shop.admin.com. So that's what the wildcard means. Any subdomain names are still covered by that certificate. With the cheap ones, it's one single domain only. Okay, and then they've got some different levels. So you can look. These have come down in price greatly. The first time I bought an SSL certificate for a client, I think the cheapest I could find was $300 a year. Now keep in mind, this isn't your cost. This is something your client is going to have to pay. So if you're quoting to do a project and you find, and you in your quote you figure there's going to be any sort of private area and a control panel of the site, credit card payment, you want to make sure that you quote the cost of the SSL certificate, include that in your quote. So typically what I do is I'll buy these and I'll pay for it, but then I will invoice my customer and they'll pay me back. I'll also charge them for maybe an hour of my time to get one of these set up. Okay. Now many hosting companies offer SSL certificates as well. They're not going to offer them to you this cheaply. It's simpler if you do it through the hosting company. You can just buy it through them, and they do everything in terms of buying the certificate, setting it up on the server. So it's less work. It's typically a little bit more expensive. Okay. So if you want to buy a cheap one from a company like this, here's kind of the process. The first thing that you do is you go to the SSL certificate issuer and you have to buy the certificate. When you buy the certificate, it asks you for information about the website owner. So you don't put in your information, you put in information about the company or organization whose website will be using the certificate. So your client, in effect. So they'll want to know the name and address of the client. I'll kind of show you how this works. I've bought a number of them here. Until Ross showed me this, I was buying them here. Generally, they're $49. Okay. So I say I want to buy a certificate, and there's some back and forth between the certificate issuer and the hosting company, and you get to play the gopher running back and forth between them. Okay, so you can get them for 1, 2, or 3 years. They are not transferable between servers though. So typically I only buy them for 1 year, because if I have any problem on my host and I want to move the site to another host, I have to buy a brand new certificate. You can't transfer it from one server to another. Okay. So I say I'm going to buy one. So you put in your own information as the administrator. Okay. And then what happens here is you need what's called a certificate request from the host. So you have to figure out already where am I going to host this domain, or where is it already hosted if I'm going to keep it there. And you have to contact the hosting company and get a certificate request from them. So here's what that would look like. So this is generated on their web server. You can't do this yourself. You need to request this from the hosting company. So if I go into my old support tickets, we can probably find, I can show you what one of these looks like. So if I looked at my closed ticket, let's see, we can see this. So I've asked them, the host, for the certificate request. So these guys charge $75 for a year, and they say we need this information about the client. So the contact name, the organization name, and their location. So I gave them that. Where is the certificate request? I have them in here somewhere. So here's the certificate request. So they generate the certificate on the server, and you have to take that code, including the first line that says begin request and the last line that says end request, and you have to copy this and provide it in here to the certificate issuer. They need that code to generate a unique certificate to run on that domain and on that host. And then usually it takes an hour or two, and then you'll get an email from the certificate issuer saying your certificate's ready, click here to download it. So you download the certificate from the company that issues it, then you connect by FTP and you upload it to the web server. So I probably have an example here. If I log in, I can show you. So sometimes the certificate's one file, sometimes it's 2 files. I can probably find one here. Where would they be? So here are my 2 certificates. These 2 files. One is a PKCS and that's a PEM file. So those are the certificate files that I bought from Rapid SSL that include that request. Now those files are on the server so the hosting company can access them. And then I tell the hosting company, okay, I've uploaded the files, they're in this directory, can you guys go ahead now and install the certificate? And they responded. So this whole process took from the time I made the request. I made the request 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and they got back to me here. So they gave me the certificate request Wednesday evening, and I uploaded the files Thursday morning. So it took about a day. I mean, had I done it not 10 o'clock at night, it would have been done the same day. But it will take a few hours to do. So you don't have to do the back and forth if you just buy it through the company. So the last time I asked these guys for a certificate, they said, well, you can buy one from us. And I said, well, you charge $75. I can buy them from Rapid SSL for $49. So if I can buy it for you for $49, I'll get it from you, and then I don't have to go back and forth. And they said, sure, we'll do that. We'll give it to you for this. We'll match their price. So now, from now on, with this host, they'll do it for me for the same price as what I was paying. Okay? So it takes a little bit of back and forth. And then the certificate's set up, but your job isn't quite done yet. Okay? There's a couple additional things you need to do. So if I go to Blackboard, when we see the S, We know this page is running under the certificate. What happens if I delete the S from the URL and hit enter? Meaning I'm going to try to load this page, but I'm going to try to go around the security certificate. I want to try and load it in plain text and not encrypted. What do you expect will happen?
Might not load.
Might not load.
It's gonna go anyway.
Right? Any page that you want to run under the SSL certificate, you need to have a little check in the header that checks if HTTPS is on or off. And in PHP, in all scripting languages, there's a server variable that will tell you whether HTTPS is on or off. And if it's off, you need to use header location to redirect the user back to the HTTPS version. Otherwise, you've installed your certificate, but you're letting users go around it. Okay. The very first PHP file we made in this class, there's actually a value here. So here was our very first, no, that's not the one. PHP, let's see. Where's my test page? Maybe it's this one. So all of these variables, remember this was the very first page we did on week 1. We wrote this little PHP info function. In here, there's all kinds of variables about the server, and somewhere in here, here's all the server PHP variables, and in here, somewhere it should tell us if HTTPS is on or off. I just have to figure out where it is. I think it's in one of these, somewhere in this page.
You just open it up.
Yeah, I think I'll have to find it. Yes. John, you have an idea where it is?
Wouldn't a server request URI or remote added?
Yeah, that's true. We could. Well, request URI doesn't give us. Oh, hang on. I'm curious if I type it in. This page does have the SSL certificate, so let me try it here. Let's scroll down to the bottom. Here's the variable. Server HTTPS evaluates to on. So that's the value you need to check. Okay, and then you get all kinds of information. So you can check that value from the server collection, and HTTPS will have an on or off. So if it's off, you need to use header location to redirect the user to the same page, but make sure you put HTTPS at the front of the URL. The other thing you have to check, unless you buy one of these wildcard certificates, which are more expensive, you need to be very careful when you buy the certificate. So typically we want to buy the certificate to run at www. And then our domain name. Okay. So for example, I think I've got one here. Let me go here. So this page, most of the pages are public. There's no HTTPS until, as soon as we go into the register page, the HTTPS is on. Okay. If I try and take it off, I've got a script at the top that checks, that takes me back to the secured version, but the certificate is registered here, www. And then the domain name. I didn't buy a wildcard certificate, which means if I go here with HTTPS, what will happen is the user is going to get an error saying the site you're trying to visit doesn't match the security certificate, and they're going to get a big red X and a scary error message, and they're going to go running away screaming from the site. Okay. So not only do I have to check for HTTPS, I also have to check whether the user's gone to www or not. Because the rest of the pages I could go here without www, could just go here, and they'll work fine. Okay, there's no www in the name. But as soon as I go here, if I take that out, this is going to break my certificate and the user is going to get a warning saying the certificate doesn't match the domain I'm trying to load. So I've also done a check not only for HTTPS, I've also got a script checking that www is part of the URL, and if it's missing, I put it back in. Okay. So this is one of the tricks you have to make sure when you register. Not only do you register the certificate with www, but you have to make sure the site the user is loading that version of it. And if they don't, you have to put www dot back into the URL, or they're going to get a big error, which will frighten most users away. I'm not sure if I still have a sample of this. Yeah, here's what happens, right? It says you asked to connect securely here, so most people are just going to leave, right? So if I didn't put that little check with www on, this is what my users would get. Nobody's going to go in here. So that's a bit of a gotcha you got to make sure about. Okay, so
What happens if you couldn't get me out of here?
I don't know where it takes me.
Oh,
Just back here, right? You can say, so if I go to the details, right, see, so here, it does have a certificate, but the certificate, this site runs on Shopify, so the certificate is only valid if I typed in, so if I type in treasurenet.myshopify.com, it should work, because the certificate's registered there, right? So that'll work, and it's HTTPS. But if I try and go this way, okay, you get that. So we have to be really careful when we buy the name. And if we're going to go to the trouble to buy the name, we may as well make sure that HTTPS is on and that we're forcing users into the name that matches our certificate. Okay. Probably, so it's not really a very complicated process. I'm sure many of you are going to wind up over the next little while having to do this and having to set one up. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? One other tip. If you buy the certificate, the expiry notices on the certificate are going to come to you. Typically, you'll get 3. You'll get 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. Don't ignore them. Because if you let your certificate expire, people are going to get that error message, right? If you let it expire and people click links that go to the HTTPS version, it's going to say the site's not secure, and the users are just going to leave. So make sure you renew the certificates before they expire. And again, I think I mentioned this already, but if you move a site from one server to another, you need to buy a new certificate. The certificate is specific to that server, and you can't transfer it. Okay.
If a certificate expires, can't you just reroute through HTTP?
Pardon?
Can't you just use regular HTTP instead of HTTPS
To do what?
if the certificate expires?
You can, but for example, you should have scripts in your site that direct the user to the HTTPS version. So the users are going to get taken, should be forced into the secured version. Well, if the certificate expires, then they're going to get a message saying the site's not secured. So you want to avoid that and make sure you renew it before they expire. Okay, so what are we building today? Ultimately, I'm just going to log in here. So what we want to build in here, ultimately what we want to be able to do is upload a photo and have that photo show up in here when we're looking at one user. So we're going to want to be able to copy images to the server, generate those files on the server, and then we're also going to add another link in here by the end of the class that will say gallery And it will look something sort of similar to this. I'm going to give you all a copy of all these images, and we'll look at uploading them. So we get both a small and a large of all of these. Okay? I tried to be cross-cultural here and hit every gender, ethnicity, sport as much as I could in my little 6 records. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind up changing some of these so then I can upload the appropriate image. So I'm going to change the names of some of these. And I'll give you these images so you don't have to spend time on Google trying to find images. Okay, I've uploaded these to Blackboard. So what we're going to do first is we'll just build a basic upload page that's disconnected from our application first, just so we can go over the mechanics of how a file upload works in PHP. How do we let the user upload a file and save it on the server? Then we'll look at integrating that functionality into the application we already have running. Okay. So I'm going to make a lesson 10 folder for today. So let's think about, we can just make a quick note here. I'll go back into lesson 10. So let's talk about, before we start building anything or do any code, what things will we need to do in order to allow the user to upload a file? And for now, our upload, we're going to let the user upload any kind of file they want. We're not going to really filter.
You need to give input type equals file.
Okay, so we will need, and that has to go inside of what?
The form, the registration.
Okay, so we need to build a form that includes input type equals file, name equals something. So this is one of the only, I sort of said from week 1, HTML is dumb, doesn't really do anything. The input type equals file is one of the rare exceptions. Instead of just presenting or collecting data, it actually has some built-in functionality. What happens, what will the user see if we put that HTML on the page? What will they see and how does it behave?
You'll see a browse link.
Yeah, so it creates a browse link, and what happens when they click browse?
So browse to directories.
Yeah, it brings up a file dialog box on, regardless of their operating system, Linux, Windows, Mac. So it's got that intelligence baked right into it. We don't have to do anything, we just need to include that control and make sure we put it in a form. So we'll need that. What else will we need? So we have a file on our local computer and we want to use the browser to generate a copy of it on the server.
We need some file functions on page.
Yes, we will. We need one other thing on our form. Well, we will need a submit button, yes. Our form also will need a particular attribute. So add to the form tag the attribute. Anybody know what attribute we're going to need? We haven't used it before. John?
Multiple?
No, you're close. What we have to add is an encoding type attribute. Okay? We have to talk about how the files get copied for a minute. Okay? So I've got these images, right? I have a copy of this image on my computer. What I need to do is get a copy of this image to be created inside let me just rename that. I want an exact copy created here. Now we're not using FTP for this to transfer the file. So how, when I browse and upload, how does that file actually get copied from my local computer? Right, here's my local file. What's the actual process of how this JPEG file winds up with an exact copy on the server?
Probably only the directory goes there and then it refers back.
Good guess. Nope. We're not using FTP. What actually happens is this. When we copy it, our file, doesn't matter if it's a JPEG, a PDF, a Word document, an Excel file, a zip file, anything. So, you zip and upload your assignment to Blackboard. It's the same process. What happens is we first have to convert this file to binary code. So basically it's converted to ones and zeros. The ones and zeros can be posted through our form over to the server, and then the server basically decodes the ones and zeros back into the original file format. So the transfer from here to here through the browser is through binary code. In order for that to happen, we have to specify a certain attribute of our form tag. If we don't do this, it won't do the binary conversion. So what we need to add in our form tag is an encoding type. And we'll have to give it this value. John, this is where you were close. You said multi. This attribute will have to go in any form tag where we're letting users upload one or more files. Okay? If we don't include that attribute, we won't get an error, but our file just doesn't get copied to the server. It's like the file upload just doesn't exist. Okay? So we always have to remember to include this attribute on our form if we're going to let the users upload. So then we'll have to now do, as Yash said, we'll need some PHP processing. Okay? So what things might we do with that file? Or what information about that file might we have access to that we might want to know?
Check the extension if it's an image.
Okay. So we can check the file extension. Now, checking the extension is not perfect, right? Why not? Okay, yeah. What else is checking the extension not foolproof?
We can change the extension.
Right, because we could change the extension, right? I could go here, let's say I make a copy of this. Just paste that, right? I could do this, or I could do the reverse. I could take an executable file, give it a JPEG extension, and upload it, right? So it's not foolproof. There is actually a built-in function in PHP that will actually check the MIME content type. So it ignores the extension. It tells you the actual file type. That library is not installed on DreamHost, so we won't be able to use it. All we can really do for today is check the extension. Let's think about how, we can check how this works. Let's look at Facebook's photo gallery for a minute. We haven't seen Herb for a while. Okay. I'm curious, what do you think will happen if I try and upload this file to an image gallery? It is a JPEG, but it's got an executable extension.
There's a chance it might get rejected because it may treat it like a virus.
Yeah, let's see. I'm curious what it will do, right? So I'll pick my executable. Okay, so it actually knows. Although it didn't upload it. I don't see my photo. Let's try and put it in here.
I think it's because you said you didn't want to leave the page. You rejected it.
Oh, okay. So it, by default, is looking for all, but I can try. Okay, so there's my file. So it actually, Facebook's actually checking the real content type, it's not just checking the extension. So for our purposes, we're going to wind up checking the extension because that's the limit we have on DreamHost. To do our due diligence, we probably want to check the content type. So we can check what type of file it is. What other things could we check? So we want to check the extension. What else about that file might we want to know? Yeah, we might check the size, right? And sometimes that's a maximum. It could also be a minimum. One of my clients, they created photo GIFs where users had to upload their photos, so there was a maximum file size, but there was also a minimum, because if the file was too small, the image was too small, they couldn't print the item. Okay, so they had both a minimum and a maximum. There's one other thing we might want to check. So the extension, the size, could be, think about duplicates. John?
Check if the file already exists in the directory.
Okay, or so, and there's a few different ways we could do this.
You can only check by name and the name.
So we can check by name, or our other option is we can make sure we give every file a unique name. I prefer that rather than checking whether the name exists. We'll just put a unique identifier onto each name. So that way we know we're not overwriting any files. Okay, we'll look at what happens on DreamHost if we don't. Okay. Now with PHP, where do the files get uploaded to? On any server.
It gets stored in a temporary spot, and then you have to move it to the directory.
You got it. So with PHP, the server assigns a default cache spot for every single upload. Even if it's the same browser session and the same file being uploaded, each one goes to a different spot in cache. They don't stay there long. I think it's 15 or 20 minutes. And if we don't take the file out of cache and save it to where we want it to ultimately reside, that file gets deleted. So we have to copy from cache to a permanent directory. So this is the process we're going to go through. Okay. So what we want to do, we're going to build a basic form with just a simple upload and a simple browse and upload button. And then we're going to write the PHP code where we can check the type of file, we can check the size, we can name it and upload it to the server, and then if it's an image, we can display that image on the page. Okay, so we're not going to use our database for this part. We're going to look just at simply how the uploads work. So if you want to open up your code editor, please.
Do you store images in database or?
We'll come to that later. We're just going to deal with uploading first, and then we'll deal with the database later. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new PHP page. I'm not going to bother putting a header and footer on it. These will just be standalone pages. So I'm going to call this page, put it in my lesson 10 folder. I'm just going to call it upload file.php. There's no PHP code on here, so you could use an HTML or HTML extension. It doesn't matter. This is just going to be a basic form. I'm not going to bother with CSS or anything else on it. So I'll put in an input, and the input type we need is file. That will give us the browse button, which brings up the file dialog box. We have to give it a name. If we don't give it a name, we're not going to be able to refer to that file on the next page. Whoops, this should be input type equals submit. So just an upload, it's just a browse button, and a submit will look like this. Notice that input type equals file. It renders, it will look slightly different in different browsers. We'll look at it in all three browsers. It'll work the same way, but the visual representation of that input type equals file will vary slightly from Chrome to Firefox to Internet Explorer. And the other thing I need that I forgot is our form tag. So we're going to use post as our method. Our action will be save upload.php. And this is where we need that encoding type attribute. And we want multi-part form data. Whoops. And I need to move my end form tag down below my submit button. Otherwise, my form will never submit. Now, we can still put regular controls on the form, like text boxes and drop downs, and in fact, we'll do that because on our athlete page, we still will want our 3 text boxes for first name, last name, and email, but we're going to add an input type equals file at the bottom. So all the other controls will still reference using post, but the file will have to reference using a different collection. It's not considered part of the post collection. So there's all the HTML. So the only thing that's things that are new, that attribute we haven't used before, and we also haven't used this one. So let's upload this page to the server. Connect to DreamHost and upload it to a lesson 10 folder. So this is what it should look like in the browser. So in Firefox, the button says Browse and no file selected. Will look slightly different in Chrome's implementation. So in Internet Explorer, it looks like this. It looks like a text box, although I can't actually type in it. And Chrome's implementation looks like this, says no file chosen. So in any of them, the browse button will bring up my file dialog box, directory dialog box. So I could go ahead and browse to a file and click upload, but I'm going to get a 404, right? We don't have save upload yet. So let's do one other thing here. Here's my directory on the server. I want to create a subfolder inside of here, which is where we will store all of the uploads. So we're going to make a subfolder. Rather than putting the uploads in here where our PHP pages are, they're going to go in a separate folder, which is typical by convention. If we're letting users upload files, we keep the files uploaded by our users in a separate directory from all of our web pages. So I'm just going to right-click in here and create a directory, and I'll call it uploads. So when we write our save page, that's where any files the user uploads are going to get stored.
Can't we just put it in the database using Word or PLL?
Okay. We'll talk about the database after. Again, I'm glad you're thinking ahead, but one step at a time. We're not dealing with the database yet. We're just dealing with the mechanics of how do we upload a file and get it on the server. That's step one, so we need to walk before we can run. Okay, there's no point thinking about how do we get it in the database when we don't even yet know how to save a file on the server.
Yeah.
So let's do step one first. I appreciate your thinking ahead, but just hold that thought. So we're going to want all our files saved into the uploads folder. Okay, so what I think we're going to do, we're going to take a 10-minute break. When we come back for part two, we'll build the save upload page where we will do all of these things that we've outlined here. Okay, we'll take a break. Okay, so we're back with part two. We've got our form up and running on the server, and we've got an uploads directory so that we can save our files. So we're going to create a new PHP page, which we will call save upload. So I'm going to save this one as save upload.php. And we'll put some PHP tags on here. Okay. So the first, we're going to inspect our file a little bit. We'll get the name. We'll get the size. We'll get the extension. And then we'll get the temporary location. Then we will move to the uploads directory.
Can you rename it as well?
We can. Yep, we will do that eventually. We won't do that at first, but we will do it eventually. Okay. And then lastly, if the file is an image, display the image. If they upload a Word document, we're not going to bother trying to generate an image. So we're going to do all these things. So we'll create a bunch of variables. I'll create a variable called $name. So now we have to access the name of that file that got uploaded. Now our form uses post. We still have post here. But we're not going to use the post collection. Which collection do you suppose we're going to use in order to get information about that file upload?
Session.
I think, Daniel, you said it?
Files?
Yeah, we're going to need the files collection. Okay. And notice, so now we need to supply the name of our file upload box. So if we go back to our form, we called it upload. Now we're going to see some syntax we haven't seen before. So that'll give us our files collection has an array, because potentially we have multiple file upload boxes on our page. And then each file also has its own array of properties. In this case, it has another property called name. So let's just print the name out to the page. So get the file upload box called upload and access the name property. So this name property will be whatever the file was called on our local machine. File name won't change. So let's upload this. Try browsing to a file on our local computer and see what we get. So I'm just going to upload my save page. And now I'll just browse. I'll go into the pictures. If you're on a lab computer, there are sample pictures here. You know, I'll pick penguins. So now when I click upload, it shows me the original file name. If I browse to a different file, whatever that file is called, it can read the name. If I browse to something other than a JPEG, it should still work. I can upload text document. So it's reading the file name. Let's do the same with size. So we're going to read the size attribute, store it in a variable called size, and we'll display that on our page as well. So I'll update my page on the server. Refresh. And now it should give me the name of the file size. So this desert, notice the file size is in bytes. Okay, so if you're checking it, you'll have to convert it to kilobytes by dividing by 1024. Okay. If I pick a different image, I should get a different file size. In fact, and we can see, so desert's 827 kilobytes, so roughly 84,000 bytes. If I pick a different one, this is 758 kilobytes, 77,000 and change in bytes. So if we have a minimum, a maximum, or both, we can write a rule to check whether the file size is within our allowable limits, or if not, we can tell the user the file size is invalid. So for the extension, we can use type. Now keep in mind, as I said, type really only checks the extension. It's not actually checking the file type the way that Facebook did. So let's add the type. And I'll resend my upload. So it tells me that's an image / JPEG, but it just bases that on the extension. If I upload do I have a Word document here? Let's see. I can upload a document, and there's my file type for a Word document.
Instead of this, can you just extract the extension from the name?
You could extract the extension from the name, yep.
Doing something like Craig split or something.
Yep, or you can just search for the last, yeah, you can find the dot and then the characters to the right of the dot. You could do that way. The last thing we want is the temp location, because in order to move it out of cache, we need to know where that file is. So I'll create a variable called tmp name. So tmp underscore name is the other built-in property of the file object that will tell us where the server's storing it in cache. And the server will automatically generate that. We have no control over that. So even if we upload the same file repeatedly, that value will change every time. So it's tmp underscore name. So if I refresh it now, here's where the file is. It's /tmp. It always starts with PHP, and then it's a random string. If I refresh and upload the same file, that part changes every time. So that's where the file is in cache, in a temp directory on the server. It won't stay there permanently, however. I want to go back to my form for a minute. I want you to watch what happens without this attribute. I'm going to take this out. So if I remove that from my form, and I re-upload, So now I pick a picture. So without that encoding type, the file never gets copied to the server and all of my properties are blank. I don't get an error, but there's nothing there. So it's critical anytime we use one of these, type equals file, that attribute must be there. So now what we want to do is make a copy of that file, but copy it to the uploads directory, right? We created this subfolder. My uploads folder is still empty here. So PHP has a function that actually has a descriptive name, believe it or not. Anybody know what function we're going to use to move the file out of the temp directory and into the uploads directory?
I would guess the move function.
It's move, yeah, but there's more to the name. Starts with move.
Move the file.
You're close. It's called move uploaded file. When I open the parameter, my code editor recognizes it. When I open the parameter bracket. So two parameters. Where's the file? Where's it going? So what value tells us where the file is currently? Yeah, we'll use that temp name variable.
Temp name plus name dot name.
So temp name is where the file is now. Where do we want to put it? Yeah, so into our uploads folder and then a slash. So inside of that folder. Now for now, we'll just keep it with the original name. Right, so if we uploaded penguins.jpg, it'll be called penguins.jpg inside of our uploads folder. Now, we will want to manipulate this because we're going to have to deal with duplicate files, but let's just get this working and then we'll deal with duplicates.
So if there is no uploads folder, is it going to create?
No, good point. So let's say I mistyped that. Let's say I call it upload, right? My directory is called uploads plural. Let's see what happens if I try it like this. That's a very good question, Lucy. So I browse to an image, I pick my desert JPEG. What do you expect will happen? Yeah, what will the message say? You're right. Failed to open stream, no such file or directory. So that's what happens if you try and upload it to a folder that doesn't exist. You're going to get this error.
What if we don't get a name?
If we don't, so if we just do this?
Yeah.
Okay, good question.
It's gonna save it then.
If I do it now, the file will get created here in the same directory as my page. So it will get saved right here. But I don't want it here, I want it here instead. So I need this.
What about there is no name?
Well, it will fail. Name it's a required parameter. You have to give it a name. You can change the name, but you can't leave it blank. You have to specify what the name of the file will be on the server. Okay? It's a good question. So now if I refresh and resend my upload, no errors. So now if I refresh here, here's my file. So we've now got a copy on the server. Now, what will happen if I hit refresh and click the resend button? There's three options. I could get an error, it could overwrite the file, or it could generate a file with a new name. So here's my file time-stamped at 2:17:34. What do you think is going to happen if I refresh? Well, let's find out, shall we? Okay, so no error. And now when I refresh, It's 218. So the default behavior will be to overwrite if that file exists. So there are different ways, several different things we can do. We should make sure this doesn't happen, right? Imagine you're all on Blackboard and everyone uploads assignment2.zip and they haven't dealt with making sure file names are unique. Well, whoever uploaded the last one, that's what everybody's file is going to be, right? So we need to deal with that. So there are several different ways we can do this. Any suggestions of what we could do for making sure that we're not overwriting files?
Get the latest file name and then add some number to it.
Okay, yep, that's my preference.
File exists.
We could check if it exists, but then if it exists, what are we going to do? Are we going to reject it? Or, yeah, we'll have to create a name. Here's a simple way that I like to use to name the files. Every session is automatically assigned a unique ID number by the web server. So what I like to do is access that session ID and include that ID as part of the file name. That way, even if we all uploaded the file with the exact same name at the exact same time, each one of us would get a unique name. Okay, let's look at how this works. So, create a unique name using the session ID generated by the server. Now, if we want to access the existing session, what do we have to call first?
Session start.
So we're going to call session start. And then I'm going to change the name. Say our name is equal to session underscore ID. So that's a function that will give us the unique session ID, and then I'll maybe just append on, let's say, a dash and the name. So we're going to use the session ID as a prefix, session ID and a dash as the prefix before our file name. Now, you could change this. You could use any kind of naming convention that you like. This is just one that I happen to use. There's many different ways. You could include a date and time on here. There's different things you could do. You could include the user's IP address. So we're going to append on a unique ID and a dash in front of the name. We'll try it this way. So I'll re-upload the save page. And now I'm going to refresh one more time. What do we need to do to get around this? Header's already sent.
Yeah, copy.
We'll need our output buffering. So we'll start the buffer at the top. We'll flush it at the bottom. This shouldn't be new to anybody. We've been doing it for weeks now. So OB flush at the very bottom and OB start at the very top. So try one more time. Okay, no error. So now when I go in and refresh my uploads, there's my unique session ID. So if I upload a different image now, it's going to have this same prefix on the front. So if I go back, browse to something else, it's the same browser session. So this is helpful because now I know that this is the same user uploading these files together. Let's say they were buying something and they needed to upload files as they were doing some kind of transaction. Now if I go to Chrome, I'm on the same computer, same IP address, different session though. So if I pick this furry guy, actually, you know what, I'll pick the same file. I'll pick desert here. So here's my Chrome upload, and here's my Firefox upload. They each have a unique session ID. If I close the browser and go back, I'm going to get a new session ID again. Now, this does mean if in Chrome I upload this same file, it will overwrite it, right? So this one's dated, timestamped 2/23/37. If I go back to Chrome and refresh and continue, it's now 2/24. I'm okay with that if it's the same browser session, so it's the same user uploading the same file in one browser session. I think it's okay that I overwrite it. I assume they probably want to overwrite it in that case because it's the same user and same browser. If you want it to be so that the files are never overwritten, you could include the current date and time in your file name as well. I find using the session ID tends to work pretty well. And the last thing we can do is we can check if we have an image, we can display the image on the page so the user can actually see their file from the server. So I'll just put in an if statement here. So we can evaluate our type variable. So if type equals image slash, I think it was image slash JPEG. So if type is equal to image slash JPEG, let's show the image. So we'll echo an image tag and set the source to uploads slash name, right? It'll print out an image tag, and we're going to use our image name variable as the source. That will include the session ID we've given the name, the file, before we saved it.
Don't you want to do a file like this?
Well, we just uploaded it here,
Ah,
so it should be there. It'll never get here. If this crashes, that line won't execute. If that line doesn't crash, we know the file exists. So now we'll just display the photo on the page. If I refresh. Oops. I'm in single quotes here, so we're going to have to append on our variable name this way. We need the single quotes and the concatenation to read our variable. Try that again. So not only does it upload the file, so here's 227, so there's my current upload. It also shows the picture too. If I want to go back and upload something else, shows our photo. So uploading any file really works the same way. If it's not an image, that image tag doesn't get printed. So if I want to go and upload something other than an image file, I want to upload an Excel spreadsheet. It tells me it's a spreadsheet and there's no image tag being generated. But my file still gets copied to the server. There's my Excel file. Right here. Does anybody have questions about any of the code we've used on our page? I think it's got to be JPEG.
JPG works.
JPG does work?
Didn't work for me. When I tried to upload a JPEG, it just didn't display.
Let's try it.
I'm running WAMP server.
Ah. So on the server, I believe you need this. Now, I'm not sure what's going to happen if we upload a PNG file. We probably want to allow that as well. Let's see what happens. I should have a PNG somewhere we can try. Let's go into pictures. Here, I'll try and upload a PNG file. So we probably want to allow PNG as well. So in that case, it would be image PNG. So to make this better, this should be a JPEG or type equals image / PNG. We should probably allow both of these. So I kept those brackets, I added a second condition, and then round brackets around the entire if statement. So now our page should allow both JPEGs and PNG files. Sorry, it should show either of those, right? Originally it only showed a JPEG. So I'm going to try that file again. So there's my PNG. So if we're building a photo gallery and image uploader, we want to be checking that the type is one of those two. If it's not one of those two, we want to tell the user it's an invalid file type and they need to upload an image. Okay, Josh, that's a very good question. Thanks for pointing that out. Any other questions about our code? So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to include this code in the application we've been building, but we're also going to need a place in the database, Yash, to store the photos. We've got a couple of options for how we could store the photos. What choices do we have available in terms of storing those images along with our athlete records? How could we store the photos?
Blob data type.
Okay, so one option is we can actually embed the images right in the MySQL database using the blob data type. So blob stands for what?
Binary large object.
Stands for a binary large object. So the database basically converts and stores the files in binary as ones and zeros. That's one option. Most applications don't actually store the files directly in the database with blobs. What's our other option if we don't want that?
Store the file location.
Yeah, the other option is we simply create a varchar field that will store the name of the file. We upload the file to the server and the database just stores the name. Why do you think that is a more common method instead of using blobs and embedding the files directly in the database?
Much faster.
Yeah, it's much faster. To store the files directly in our SQL tables takes a lot of storage space, right? If we have a huge database, all those files get in there, the database gets massive. and slows down. So most of the time, we just want to store the file names in the database, and we upload the files on the server. So that's what we want to do here. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to modify our athletes table and add a new column that will store in an image. Okay, we'll store the name of the image. So you're going to need to connect to your database for a minute. You can use Workbench or you can use your browser. I'm just going to use my browser. So if you use the browser, just click on your database name. That, in effect, runs the use command for you. You're now connected to your database. And then just go to the SQL tab. So we're going to run a quick script, an alter table script. So we're going to alter our athletes table. We're going to add a column called, what should we call our column? So this will store the name of the photo.
Image location.
Okay, we could call it image location. We're just going to make this a string field, a text field. We'll make it 100 characters. This should be all we need to do. This will add a new column, call it image location. Actually, you know what? Maybe just to make this a little shorter, why don't I just call this photo? Be a little easier for us. Okay? So we'll call our column photo. And I'll click go. So we should now have a photo column. I go here and browse. We now have, so my photo shows as null because I have a bunch of records in here. Obviously, there's no data in there. So that was step one. We need to set up a place in our table. So step two is we're going to have to go back to our athlete page. First of all, for when we add a new athlete, we're going to align these boxes a little bit better. And then we're going to add two things to this form. What two things do we need to add so that we can include a photo when we're adding a new record? Yep, we'll need an input type equals file. And what else will we have to add? It will be something invisible. We won't see the other thing we have to add. John?
The encryption type.
Right, not the encryption. We'll have to add the encoding type attribute. Otherwise, our file upload never works. Okay. So, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go into my lesson 9, grab all my pages from last week. We'll grab that whole application, and I will copy it to my lesson 10 folder. If you take my Blackboard files, remember you're going to have to change your credentials in db.php. The other thing we have to change is in our htaccess file. I'll just do it here. It's going to be pointing to our lesson 9 folder. Now, I think when I showed you this last week, I said we needed to put the full path into the 404 page. Turns out we don't. As one of my brilliant students pointed out to me, we can use a relative path. So here's my file. So I'm just going to make this relative. I'll take all that out. That will actually work. I can take out the path and just have the file name, which is good. And then I'm going to open my db.php because I need to put my login back in there. Now I'm going to upload everything to the server. So I'll have a complete working copy of our application in lesson 10. So now I should be able to go to my lesson 10. So it works exactly the same. So on this page, so here's my new athlete page. So on this page, we're going to want the browse button. The other thing we're going to want to add when they're editing is we're going to want to be able to display the current photo and then also still have the browse button so the user could replace the photo if they choose. All right, so we needs to work both for add and for edit. So we're allowing them to upload the photo, and then we're going to build our gallery later that looks kind of like this. So I want to open up my athlete page, singular, athlete.php. And in our form, we need to add the encoding type and set that as multi-part form data. Okay, so this is on athlete.php. We're just going to add that inside of our opening form tag. That will allow the binary conversion of our file, so it can be transferred from the local computer to the web server. I'm also just going to add a class into my labels. It's bugging me how they're not aligned. Here, I go to new. So in here in my labels, I'm going to give this a class of call sm2. This will set a fixed width for all of those pages, all of those labels. I'm just using a bootstrap class. So if I refresh here and upload. Whoops. I need a couple other glyphs. So here I need to give these a class of, I think I can use row. We'll try that. Again, another bootstrap class. Try again. Yep, so now they're nicely aligned. I'm going to also move my save button over here. So around my hidden inputs, small 2 call, offset 2. And I'll move that div down below. So this should give me 2 columns of padding on the left, so my save button should appear underneath my text boxes. John?
Why didn't you add the class to only the submit button rather than wrapping it in a div?
I didn't think to try that. I will try it. Let's see. Good question. I don't know if that'll work or not, but I'm certainly up for trying. Okay, yeah, can do it that way. That's fine. Oops. Okay. So now I want one more div with a class of row. We'll put on a label for photo. And now we'll put on our input type equals file. And name is equal to photo. So first we'll do this when we add a new athlete we can upload, and then we'll come back and modify the page for editing later, so that we display the existing photo as well. So this should give us that file upload box down below the email box now. So I can go ahead and browse, but the other thing I'm going to do, it's sort of bugging me how this is all pushed off to the left. I'm going to put this whole section, just for fun, I'm going to tab everything over inside my form. Actually, I'll put it right above my form. Right at the top, I'll put in a div with a class equals container. This will give us a little padding on the left. And I'll just move my end div so all of that stuff gets indented. So a container div above my form, and I'll close that div down at the bottom. So container is our class. So it'll just move it over a little bit, give us a little padding on the left. So this should be all we need to do on our form for when we're adding a new athlete. Should work this way. So now we're going to need to open up the Save Athlete page, because not only are we doing an insert if we have no athlete ID, but we now also need to check the photo and make sure it's a valid type. And then when we save, we want to include the name of that photo in the database. So let's open up our Save Athlete page. Anybody having a problem getting their form to look like this, or are you doing okay? So now on our Save page, we need to do some checking for the photo. Now for starters, we're only going to check the photo. We can't require the photo, because if the user is editing an existing record and they don't include a photo, that's fine, because we don't want to make them, if they already have a good photo, they shouldn't have to re-upload the same photo every time, right? They should be able to leave the photo out. Or maybe they want to add an athlete now and add the photo later. Okay, so let's, for now, so let's create a photo variable equals files photo name. So we'll try and get the photo name. And we can say so if it's not empty, so meaning the user did upload a photo, what should we do? What's the first thing we should do if they did upload a photo?
Check for the extent.
Yeah, let's check the type. So in this case, we'll check the type.
Are you allowing SVG and GIF and all those?
I think for now we'll just allow JPEG and PNG. So we want to check, so if the type is not an image JPEG and type is not an image PNG, no, that's not very good logic. Let's think about our logic. Because it can't be both, so this will always be false.
Why not have it if it is one or the other, and then just kind of inverse the way you were thinking?
Okay, so we probably need an OK variable as well. Okay, so if it's a JPEG or it's a PNG, so if we have a valid photo, what do we want to do with it? We don't need to display it on this page.
We need to store it that way.
We'll need it to store it in the database if that's the case, right? But we also want to rename it to make sure that the file name is unique. So let's change the name first. So we'll give the file a unique name. So we'll call session start. We already have OB start at the top, so that'll work. We'll append on the session ID just the way we did before.
Don't you want to give a user ID to the name? Because, you know, how will you know which session belongs to which user?
It doesn't matter. In this case, we don't care. It depends on the application is the simple answer. In this application, it doesn't matter who uploads the file. Okay? On Facebook, yes, it might matter because every file has to belong to a particular user. We don't have that level of abstraction in here.
Shouldn't it be type equals JPEG or PNG?
Yes, thank you. It definitely should. So now we need the temp location. So just like we did before. And now we'll call move uploaded file. In this case, we're going to store our files, we're going to put them in a folder called images. So we're going to go move to the images. Whoops, sorry. Wow. We go from our temp directory to images, and we'll put on our unique name here. So now our file's been copied. If we got a file uploaded but it wasn't a JPEG or a PNG, we probably need to give the user a message. So in this case, we probably don't want to connect and save if they've given us an invalid image. So let's add an OK variable, like we've used before, which we will default to true. And if they give us, upload a file that's not a JPEG or a PNG, we'll toggle that to false. And then we can evaluate that flag before we connect to the database and save. So in this case, they gave us a bad file, our form is not OK. So now all of this code really doesn't need to run. So I'm just going to say if okay, and we'll take all the rest of it, including our try catch. So I'll put a curly bracket right at the very end of my code, and an if okay before my try. We could also move our try to the very top of the page if we want, in case we get any error uploading the file. I think I'll leave it where it is for now. So if we've got a JPEG or a PNG, this will save it. The last thing we will have to do is potentially include the photo here, right? If we have a photo, we'll have to add it. But it will allow null, so we can probably just add it to our insert list anyway and save that file name if we have one. So I think what we'll do, we'll take a pause here. When we come back, we'll add the photo into the save. We'll see if we can upload it. Then we'll add some new records with the photos I've given you. I've actually put them on Blackboard for you. And then we'll go ahead and build the gallery page after. Okay, so we'll take a pause for 10 minutes here.